I am a canary kept by a powerful man. One day, my benefactor was in a car accident and went missing, his life hanging by a thread. Everyone thought I had lost my backer and would fall from grace. But I sneered and turned around, entering his company as a shareholder. When he finally woke up and heard about everything I had done, he sighed, "Why did you people have to provoke her?" When I first heard about Cyrus's accident, I was at the nail salon getting my last nail done under the UV lamp. I didn't even have time to admire the beauty of my freshly manicured hand before I was hurriedly informed of the terrible news. He was being rescued in the hospital, his life uncertain. I was known to be his one and only woman. In outsiders' eyes, I was the canary Cyrus kept. That sentence alone implied I had lost my pillar of support. I rushed to the hospital as fast as I could. Cyrus was still in surgery when I arrived, and that's when I heard there was a woman in the car with him. She was also being rescued. A very young girl. Younger than me, who was only 2 or 3 years from turning 30. Shareholders and Cyrus's relatives were crowding the hospital. I saw all kinds of emotions in their eyes when they looked at me. I waited at the operating room door for hours before the results came out. Cyrus hadn't completely escaped danger, he was still unconscious. As for when or if he would wake up, the doctors gave me no definitive answer. The cause of the accident was still under investigation. The driver of the other vehicle had died on the spot. Cyrus's accident threw the shareholders into chaos. As the so-called canary, I ran around with his assistant Clay handling everything. The girl in the car with him was doing better. According to the doctor, she should regain consciousness within 7 days. I asked Clay, "What's the relationship between that girl and President Cyrus?" Sure enough, Clay looked troubled upon hearing my question. "Raina, to be honest with you, I really don't know. All I know is that President Cyrus has met Miss Nova a few times. What exactly is between them, I'm not sure." Even Clay had been kept in the dark. I'd known Cyrus for over 10 years and had been with him for 5, and yet this was the first time I discovered such a secret. But I didn't have time for reflection. The day after Cyrus was admitted to the ICU, his uncle and aunt showed up. "Raina, you don't need to look after my nephew anymore," Robert, Cyrus's uncle by blood, said to me. His wife, Mary, was even more blunt. "To be fair, you and Cyrus never married. Now that he was in the accident with another woman, who knows what'll happen next. You'd best look after yourself." Their meaning was clear. I was just a woman Cyrus was about to cast aside. Even though he was unconscious, I had no standing as his family to care for him. If I remembered correctly, when Cyrus was awake, this uncle and aunt had always behaved meekly. Cyrus's family had gone bankrupt before. It was Cyrus who rebuilt everything from scratch. His success had little to do with this couple. Out of some lingering sense of familial duty, Cyrus had let their son work in his company after graduation. In the past, they'd just looked at me with contempt, thinking I wasn't fit for the public eye. Now that Cyrus was in trouble, their true faces were revealed without disguise. Before I could respond, Mary added, "And that villa you're living in, didn't Cyrus buy it? Now that he's like this, if he never wakes up, well, his family's assets shouldn't just remain in your hands, right? You should find time to move out." I smiled. Cyrus's direct relatives had all passed away. Of his blood relatives, Robert was the closest. If Cyrus were gone, Robert would be the legal heir to all his assets. I turned to Clay. Understanding my signal, he handed the bill in his hand to Robert. "What's this?" he muttered as he looked at it. I spoke clearly, "This is the hospital bill for Cyrus. Since you're going to take care of him, you can handle the payments from now on." Everything used for Cyrus, the medical equipment and medications, was top tier and extremely expensive. The numbers weren't small. Their expressions immediately changed. I continued, "Since you're taking over, please also reimburse the medical expenses I covered yesterday." "Not much, just over 200,000 yuan. I have the receipt. How do you plan to pay me?" Seeing them frozen, I added slowly, and yes, the villa I'm living in was bought by Cyrus. But the deed has only my name on it. It's my personal asset. You want to kick me out? What a ridiculous dream. Robert and Mary's faces turned indescribably dark the moment they realized Cyrus had bought me a villa. Perhaps they, as relatives, had never received such treatment. For a while, they stared at the bill, then looked up to glare at me. But deep down, they couldn't bear to part with the money. With Cyrus's current condition, keeping him alive meant burning through money, hundreds of thousands to millions in just weeks. It would be a bottomless pit. When the doctor mentioned that some equipment in the US would be more effective, I had already filed the application. If they were already distressed by a few $100,000, what would they do when they found out we'd need to spend millions in US dollars? Wouldn't that kill them? Aren't you living with him? You don't know his password? Mary suddenly realized something. Why don't you just use his money to pay the fees? I rolled my eyes gracefully and looked up at the ceiling. Sorry, I don't know his password. That was a lie. I even know Cyrus's long-abandoned QQ password. Seeing this couple about to make a scene in the hospital, I struck first. Could it be you never intended to save Cyrus at all? You're just waiting for him to die so you can inherit his fortune? We were in the hallway, and I deliberately raised my voice to draw attention from nearby doctors, nurses, and patients. Gossip is human nature. In an instant, several heads turned to look. Reina. What nonsense are you spouting here? Robert panicked, his face flushed red. I wasn't scared at all. The louder, the better, otherwise, why would you drive me away? You're even reluctant to pay his medical bills. I bet the moment I leave, you'll give up on treatment and start thinking about how to split your nephew's inheritance. Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? He's still so young, and you're already hoping he dies? Yesterday, the emergency rescue had drawn a lot of attention. Many people in the hospital already knew a rich man had been admitted. Now, hearing this juicy gossip? It was better than primetime drama. This is a hospital, there's no shortage of gossipers. Now people were already whispering. People with guilty consciences fear being exposed the most. Seeing this, Robert and his wife angrily threw the medical bill on the floor. Let's see how long you can keep this up. With that, they turned and left, fleeing in embarrassment. I bent down, picked up the bill, and turned to Clay. Get a few bodyguards to take shifts guarding the ward. Don't let any of his family near him. While Cyrus lay unconscious in the hospital, the outside world was in chaos. First, news of the car accident hit the trending topics. Then came all sorts of disputes at the shareholders' meetings. The most amusing part? Robert's son, Hayden, had suddenly jumped from being a regular employee into a management position, just a few days after Cyrus's accident. Some people were clearly in a hurry. According to the law, the closest legal heir to Cyrus's estate would indeed be his uncle. How could that family possibly let go of such easy wealth? Cyrus's condition was still critical. I stayed at the hospital for several days, only feeling a little more at ease once his condition stabilized. Over the years, plenty of people had come to curry favor with me thanks to Cyrus's status. Now that he had collapsed, my backing had crumbled as well. Those who used to act concerned were probably just fishing for information. At first, quite a few people came to visit Cyrus's ward. But now? It had grown noticeably quieter. On my phone, I even received messages from a few clueless men, saying now that Cyrus was down, I could finally be with them. Back when Cyrus was awake, those same people used to grovel before me. I looked down at the man on the bed, tubes all over his body. Even in his current frail state, you could still see the striking features of his face. For someone his age, Cyrus's achievements were nothing short of remarkable. Doctors said the chances of Cyrus waking up were slim. He could remain in a coma for half a month, half a year, maybe even several years. Sustaining his life would be a financial black hole. Robert and his wife did come back again. But the bodyguards at the ward kept them from getting anywhere near Cyrus. They shouted that I had no right to deny them visitation. I didn't bother listening to their barking. The hospital knew who was paying the bills now. And besides, even upright officials struggle to settle family disputes. They generally didn't get involved in such matters. Perhaps realizing Cyrus was unlikely to recover, they hadn't shown up these past 2 days. Instead, a few of the company's shareholders had arrived, people aligned with Cyrus, to discuss the company's situation with Clay. It was obvious now that Cyrus had fallen, there were huge interests waiting to be carved up. I sat nearby and listened for a while. Then suddenly said, "Why don't I go take a look at the company?" I wasn't joking. But when I appeared at Cyrus's company, the looks people gave me weren't much different from those at the hospital. Only now, they were filled more with scorn and contempt. "Clay, why did you bring someone unrelated to the company?" Someone immediately spoke up. "We're holding a shareholders' meeting, not loitering in the CEO's office." Why bring someone to make a scene? I glanced at the man who had spoken. His last name was Huang, and he held about 5% of the company shares. The most ridiculous thing? Robert was sitting at the head of the table, with his son Hayden to his right, neither of whom held a single share, yet were acting like they ran the place. In just a few short days, the suits on that father-son pair had visibly improved in quality. I scanned the entire room, then finally opened my mouth. "Weren't you calling this a shareholders' meeting? What's the problem with me attending?" Before anyone else could speak, Hayden couldn't help but sneer. "Raina, what right do you have to attend a shareholders' meeting?" His question amused me. "Hayden, what right do you and your father have to attend this meeting?" This company was founded by Cyrus, but it had absolutely nothing to do with the bankrupt family business he came from. As far as I knew, Hayden had even been going on matchmaking dates with rich heiresses these past few days. And why were they so eager to align themselves with him? It was simple, because they wanted a piece of what Cyrus had left behind. Now that I was here, they immediately assumed I was trying to fight for Cyrus's assets. My dad is Cyrus's uncle. He's unconscious now. Someone has to handle the company's affairs. What's wrong with us standing in for him? Technically, that was understandable. I chuckled lightly. And as a shareholder, what's wrong with me attending the shareholders' meeting? You? A shareholder? Now it was their turn to laugh out loud. Clay followed behind me and placed a document on the table for everyone to review. "This is proof of my shareholding. Please take a look." My tone was calm. As I watched them pass the document around, their expressions shifted, somewhat unsettled, clearly not expecting that a woman kept by Cyrus would actually own a portion of his company. And it wasn't a small portion, 20%. "Raina?" Hayden exclaimed. "Isn't your name Raina? What's your relationship with this Raina?" Most of them were probably familiar with the name Raina. She had been one of the company's original investors and the mysterious shareholder who always sent a lawyer to attend shareholder meetings on her behalf. I slapped my ID on the conference table. My face and my legal name, Raina, were printed in bold letters. I glanced at them indifferently. What? I can't have a stage name for daily use? Raina is Raina, it's the same person. Is that really so shocking? I ignored their astonishment and turned to the security guards who had followed me in. "Please remove anyone not directly involved." The guards stepped forward and said please to the father and son from the Cyrus family, who were seated at the head of the table. "What's the meaning of this?" Hayden's voice had risen. My lawyer stepped forward and handed over a second document. He had been Cyrus's long-term legal counsel, and many in the company recognized him. "This is the will Mr. Cyrus signed 2 years ago," he began. "In the event of any accident or illness resulting in his death, all of his assets are to be inherited solely by Ms. Raina. Since Mr. Cyrus has not updated this will in the past 2 years and is currently unconscious, it is most appropriate that Ms. Reyna temporarily manage his assets. That was the real bombshell. I watched as the faces of Cyrus's family and several shareholders darkened, expressions twisting into disbelief and barely contained anger. No way. Reyna, did you collude with the lawyer to forge this? Hayden yelled, unable to accept the truth. Cyrus would have to be insane to leave everything to you. I don't believe this will is real. That accusation crossed the line. It questioned the lawyer's professional integrity. Adjusting his glasses, the lawyer replied evenly, the will was recorded on video, with witnesses present. It's more than enough to prove Mr. Cyrus was fully conscious and aware when he signed it. And you, Mr. Hayden, do you have any proof to support your claim? A top-tier lawyer could turn your words into a trap with just a few sentences. But the situation was already clear. Even if something happened to Cyrus, I would be the sole legal heir to everything he owned, including this company. Robert and his son were escorted out. No one stopped them. The moment the will was presented, their hopes of profiting from this power struggle vanished. The meeting room fell silent. I took my seat at the head of the table. Cyrus was still in the hospital, unconscious, and his shares hadn't officially transferred to me. But everyone understood, if Cyrus didn't make it, my stake would surpass 50%. That was enough to reshuffle the board. With the authority in my hands, I could bypass unnecessary procedures and appoint a new executive team on the spot. Just days ago, they all thought I was a caged canary about to be discarded by Cyrus. Now, I sat at the top, yet some were still waiting to see me fail. They thought I had no idea how to run a company. Some voiced weak objections, others neither supported nor opposed. Regardless, I had successfully taken over Cyrus's office. The office Robert and his son had schemed to occupy, yet I was the one sitting in it first. The decor was simple, with a gray desk. No one would guess that Cyrus used pink bedsheets at home. Piles of documents were stacked on the desk, it looked like no one had touched them in days. While Robert and some shareholders had been busy forming cliques, they clearly hadn't been focusing on actual business. Clay proved competent, my appointment letter was issued quickly. To most employees who didn't know the full story, I probably looked like someone trying to seize Cyrus's assets. But that didn't matter. As the newly appointed President Reyna, I soon found my first chance to set things straight. Among the documents on the desk, about half of the projects had some irregularities. I looked at the name of the person responsible. One name kept popping up, Eric. Bring Eric to me, I said. They hadn't expected me to be so aggressive right out of the gate, targeting someone high up. Clay quietly reminded me, Eric is the nephew of Vice President Hugo. That made it even more interesting. Soon, Eric walked into my office. He looked slick, well-dressed and smooth-talking. Manager Eric, I said as I studied him. President Reyna, good morning, he greeted me politely. I didn't call him in just to see his face. Can you tell me, I asked, why the subcontracted vendors in these contracts are different from those originally approved by the company? I had never involved myself in Cyrus's business, but I knew enough to ask the right questions. Eric didn't look surprised, he clearly had prepared answers ready. President Reyna, the vendors we're working with now offer better pricing and equivalent quality. I had already discussed these changes with President Cyrus. You've just come on board, you might not be fully aware of these operational details. The implication? If Cyrus had no issues with these projects, who was I, an outsider parachuted in, to nitpick? But the biggest problem was that Cyrus was now lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Whatever he might have said, who could know for sure? As the newly appointed President Reyna, I had to at least give Cyrus's words some weight. Otherwise, if things turned ugly, it would damage my reputation. Not to mention, everyone knew the kind of relationship I had with Cyrus. I heard myself chuckle softly. Manager Eric, since President Cyrus was the one previously in charge, could you please submit the audit reports related to those suppliers for me to review? Eric was visibly stunned. He probably thought Cyrus's word would be law in my eyes, but clearly didn't expect me to insist on a review. Of course, saving costs is great, but surely President Cyrus wouldn't have judged purely on price alone? Quality matters too. Eric said, President Reina, don't tell me you don't trust President Cyrus's judgment. I'm simply taking responsibility for every word I sign. I leaned back slightly and looked at the young department manager. Can't I read the audit reports? Or, do they not exist at all? Eric left with a dark expression, saying he'd submit the reports as soon as possible. Clay reminded me about the internal factions within the company. It was nothing new. Those few who had contributed significantly in the early days of the company had now formed their own cliques. Even when they acted out of line, Cyrus had found it hard to deal with them directly. He must have had his own plans. Only, before he could implement them, the accident happened. The police still hadn't released the cause of the crash, and I suspected it was more than just an accident. Cyrus couldn't act directly. But I was different. As someone who parachuted in from above, I had no personal ties with any of them. After a long and exhausting day, Clay informed me that Hugo had invited me to dinner. Hugo was Eric's maternal uncle. Clay reminded me of that connection. President Reina, will you be accepting the invitation? I checked the time. Let's go see what he wants. Hugo chose a Western restaurant. It was quite crowded, so our conversation wouldn't be entirely private. President Reina, you're here, he said enthusiastically as he stood up. Sorry to keep you waiting, Hugo. I gave a polite smile. Not at all, I came early. He smiled and called the waiter. President Reina, any dietary restrictions? None. This Hugo was in his 50s, with a son and a daughter, both still in college. Eric, his nephew, had joined the company 3 years ago and had been promoted rather quickly. Clearly, the projects I had pushed back today were somehow tied to Hugo. President Reina, you used to stay quite low profile. Who would have thought you had such management skills, he said, in a tone that was hard to tell if it was praise or sarcasm. I smiled. Hugo, you flatter me. I hadn't exactly stayed low profile. At least before Cyrus's car accident, I had spent a lot of time playing mahjong with some of the elite ladies in our circle. Unfortunately, after Cyrus's accident, they stopped inviting me. They must have quietly kicked me out of the circle. Some even deleted me from their contacts. Who would have thought that now, I'd suddenly be sitting in Cyrus's chair? Even if it was only temporary, word had already gotten out about Cyrus's will. Those women were now frantically asking how I had managed to train my man so well. The ones who tried to add me back as a friend were in awkward positions, probably agonizing over how to word their request. Today, I saw a few in my request list saying sorry, deleted you by accident. First time running a company, President Reina. How are you finding it? Hugo asked, seemingly out of concern. I smiled lightly. Not bad. He kept talking in circles the entire meal, occasionally trying to offer unsolicited advice as an elder on how I should run the company. But he never brought up the actual issues with those projects. It wasn't until the food arrived and I had taken a few bites that he asked, how old are you this year, President Reina? I raised an eyebrow. Almost 28. 28, Hugo repeated, then added, not that young anymore. There was an undertone to his words. I calmly asked, what do you mean by that, Hugo? President Reina, with President Cyrus in his current state, to be blunt, it's uncertain whether he'll even wake up. Do you really think you can shoulder this company alone as a woman? He watched my expression carefully, pretending it was all for my own good. To be honest, a woman still needs someone to rely on. Now that President Cyrus has had this accident, you have to think for yourself, don't you? My nephew Eric, he's 27 this year, studied abroad, quite accomplished. Not bad looking either. Why don't you consider him? Young people should get to know each other. Even if it doesn't work out, at least you'll be friends. Sometimes I wonder if, in their eyes, I'm 18 instead of 28. I've never heard of a subordinate trying to play matchmaker for their boss while acting like I'm the one getting a great deal. Eric might look respectable on his own, but it really depends who you're comparing him to. If Cyrus ever heard about this, he'd probably wake up from the coma out of sheer rage. Not suitable, I said. 3 words. A flat-out rejection. What's not suitable? Hugo still tried to keep up the elder act. They're both young people, I interrupted him. Sorry, Hugo, but the kind of man I go for is someone like President Cyrus. That wasn't a tactful comment at all, it was practically saying outright that I found his nephew unattractive. Hugo froze for a moment, looking like he was about to lose his temper but had to hold it in. He finally muttered, looks don't put food on the table, but they do. President Cyrus's looks alone are appetizing. I sincerely remarked on how good-looking Cyrus was. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been with him for 5 whole years. That dinner most likely ended on a sour note. They couldn't understand why I held Cyrus as my standard, as if without him, I should be matched with just any random man. As if, in their eyes, a woman who had been with another man was now somehow depreciated in value. On the 8th day after Cyrus's car accident, I heard that the girl who was with him in the accident had woken up, but had temporary amnesia. Her family was with her. I didn't go in. I walked into Cyrus's hospital room. It was the highest grade room the hospital had. I had paid a hefty price to get him the best equipment. What happened next would be up to fate. The next day at work, I rejected every report and contract Eric submitted. None of them met the compliance requirements. I didn't hold back in my criticism. They thought I didn't understand how to run a company, but that didn't mean I was easily fooled. That day, the atmosphere in the company was tense. Eric was the first target of my new sheriff-in-town approach, the first chicken in my kill one to warn 100 strategy. If he had any sense, he'd realize that this was just the beginning. A department manager who played petty tricks in supplier negotiations? I wasn't worried about finding dirt on him. There was no way this was his only skeleton in the closet. It didn't take long for me to gather evidence. The process was easy. Cyrus had probably already noticed them before but hadn't had time to act. Now, I used it to establish my authority. The day Eric was taken away by the police, the entire company was abuzz. He had broken the law, whether it was taking bribes during work hours or using dual contracts to deceive higher-ups, it was enough to put him behind bars for years. Hugo didn't show up again. Clearly, he was trying to distance himself from his nephew. But anyone with half a brain knew, if Eric was Hugo's guy, how could Hugo's own hands be completely clean? Clay gave me an analysis, basically saying that I was too flashy in the company right now and easily making enemies. I quietly drank my tea. That's exactly what I wanted, to make enemies. A week after I became acting president, some negative news about the company began to circulate online. The gist was, Cyrus was in a coma after a car accident, and his kept woman took the opportunity to seize power in the company, pushed out key personnel, and even blocked Cyrus's family from visiting him. The exposé included a video, an interview with Robert and his family. In it, Robert, Cyrus's uncle, wiped away tears, saying that since his nephew's accident, he hadn't seen him and didn't even know if he was alive. You'd think he was the most loving uncle in the world. Mary directly targeted me, saying I was with Cyrus for his money, tricked my way into company shares, and now that Cyrus was gone, I was thrilled. In just a few words, they painted me as the classic gold-digging vixen. Meanwhile, they, as Cyrus's closest family, had nothing, not even the chance to see him. Netizens are easily swayed. Especially when ethics are involved, suddenly, they're the weak victims, and playing the victim card works like a charm. Clearly, someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Public opinion escalated quickly and even affected the company's stock price. Some partners even called to inquire about the situation. The PR department was waiting on me to make a decision. In the senior leadership meeting, someone suggested I should step down due to the stock issue. That suggestion was quickly echoed, as if it were the will of the people. I looked at them expressionlessly and finally said, "Enough. Arguing like this is meaningless." The conference room, which had been as noisy as a wet market, finally fell silent. They were waiting for my response. "First of all, I will not step down," I said, fixing my eyes on them, with not a trace of panic in my voice. "Second, all of your shares combined are still not enough to force me out." I wanted them to understand the situation clearly. Even though Cyrus was still unconscious, I was not entirely alone in the company. I wasn't stupid. I wouldn't be offending people left and right if I hadn't already secured some allies. Outsiders didn't know, but the people I had fired were now sitting in police stations. Whether I was purging dissent or rooting out corporate rot, they could think about that for themselves. "Hugo," I said, calling him out directly. "I heard Eric took all the blame at the police station. Your nephew is quite the loyal one." His face darkened immediately. The others started looking at him differently too. "I have a report here," I continued. "It outlines how Eric had been taking kickbacks and bribes since he joined the company." I distributed a copy to everyone. Eric managed to embezzle this much in just 3 years. Think what would have happened if he'd stayed longer. How would that be any different from a poisonous parasite? That line was a warning to them. If one Eric could do this, what about Hugo? As for the stock market fluctuations, haven't you all seen this before? I looked around at them. Panicking over every little bump, letting yourselves be led around by the nose, without even realizing it. The stock market isn't completely irrational. Family drama doesn't influence investors that much, they're just here for the spectacle. No matter how big the mess, there's a limit. Rumors and facts are two very different things. The stock dip was just a temporary trend. The PR team acted fast and released a clarification promptly. My shareholding can be traced all the way back to the company's founding. As for those who were let go, there are official police documents verifying the reasons. Then there's Robert's family. Hayden hasn't shown up to work for several days. I guess he's holding a grudge against me. I didn't coddle him. Unexcused absences are dealt with through formal procedures. After HR notified Hayden about the termination, my phone blew up. Mary called to question me. "How dare you fire my son?" I simply said, "If you have a problem, take it up with the lawyers." Cyrus has been in the hospital for nearly a month. The doctor's diagnosis remains unchanged. The young woman who was admitted with him is recovering and has started to recall more details. Still, I haven't gone to see her or tried to ask anything. There's no point anymore. The police investigation has dragged on with no clear conclusion. Cyrus's car was completely totaled, but nothing was wrong with the vehicle itself. The issue was the driver. The driver, now deceased, was ruled fully responsible for the accident. But the man had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, had purchased several high-value life insurance policies after the diagnosis, and his car's brakes had failed. Given the timing of the insurance purchases, there's suspicion of insurance fraud. But would someone really drive into others just to take a few down with him? At Cyrus's company, I've been settling in well. When I fired Hayden, a few people did speak up for him. After all, with Cyrus still in critical condition, it didn't look good to kick all his relatives out of the company. But I didn't care. No matter what they thought of me before, the company has continued running smoothly for a month. I believe they'll start to see me more clearly now. But with time, the ghosts begin to creep out of the shadows. Over the weekend, I went to the hospital to see Cyrus, and at the door to his room, I saw Robert and Mary, along with a young pregnant woman. They were blocked by the bodyguards. The moment they saw me, they jumped on the opportunity. "Reina, tell these guards to let us in," Mary said, supporting the young woman. "She's my niece-in-law. She and her unborn child deserve to see the father at least once." A thunderbolt struck. My eyes landed on the pregnant woman. She was slim, with a plain face and red-rimmed eyes. She looked young, maybe just out of college. I could tell she was pregnant only because of her loose-fitting dress. "And you are?" I asked. Before I could finish, the young woman dropped to her knees in front of me, voice choked with emotion. "Sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have had feelings for President Cyrus. But the child in my belly is his. Both the child and I want to see him one last time." I glanced toward the hospital room. "Well done, Cyrus. So you're the mistress Cyrus kept on the side?" The hospital hallway was already filled with gossip. It didn't bother me anymore. Cyrus and I aren't legally married, but as of now, I'm still his public girlfriend and the sole heir in his will. As soon as I said it, the girl looked like she was going to collapse. Clearly, the word mistress hit her hard. "Raina, what nonsense are you spouting?" Mary pulled the girl up. "How could you call her that? Sydney is carrying Cyrus's child. If he doesn't wake up, that might be his only heir. Who the hell do you think you are? Got any proof?" I asked. "You say it's his child, got any evidence?" If every pregnant woman showed up crying, would the baby automatically be his? Heads started peeking out from other rooms to get in on the drama. The bodyguards stood behind me, keeping Robert and Mary from doing anything rash. Between quiet sobs, the woman said, "Raina, it was just a fleeting encounter with President Cyrus. There's no real proof. He paid me off early on, afraid you'd find out." I laughed. "You came too early. You should have waited until the child was born to demand a paternity test. Or are you worried Cyrus won't survive a few more months?" "What are you saying, Raina? You're refusing to acknowledge the child?" "Why should I? I'm not Cyrus's wife. Even if he has a child out of wedlock, it's not my responsibility." Robert was briefly silenced. "You. Stop playing dumb. If the baby is his, it has a claim to what he leaves behind. Then come back after the baby's born for a DNA test," I replied, looking at the pregnant woman. "Or do you want to do one while you're still pregnant?" The young woman shrank back a little at my words and didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, she avoided the question. She said, "That night, Clay was there too." "A witness?" Now that another person was involved, Clay quickly arrived. When he saw the young woman next to Robert and Mary, his expression changed slightly. "President Raina," he greeted, stepping to my side. I asked him, "Clay, this lady claims she had a one-night stand with your boss, President Cyrus, and is now pregnant with his child. Is that true?" Clay, it was clear his brain had short-circuited. He whispered to me, "President Raina, a couple of months ago, President Cyrus happened to come across this woman being drugged. He stepped in to help. I only know she got into President Cyrus's car after that. I don't know anything else." In other words, this so-called witness, Clay, was as good as useless. Mary pointed at me and said, "That baby inside her belongs to Cyrus. You're in control of his money now, so you have to take care of Sydney." So that was their plan all along. I nodded readily, "Sure. Just don't regret it." They didn't expect my answer and were momentarily stunned. I made a call, and someone quickly came to pick up the pregnant woman. Robert and his wife tried to follow but were stopped. "I only agreed to take care of the pregnant woman, not the two of you," I said. "Raina, what do you mean by this? If anything happens to the baby in Sydney's belly because of you, the ancestors of the Cyrus family will never forgive you," Mary shouted. I chuckled. "Relax. I'll take very good care of this young lady. I'll protect the baby in her belly like it's my own." As they walked away, I narrowed my eyes slightly. Have someone look into her social circle. Anyone who jumps out at a time like this is undoubtedly after some sort of benefit. The young pregnant woman's name was Sydney. She had just graduated from university not long ago and worked as a bank teller. On paper, she appeared naive and inexperienced, just a fresh graduate. But for a girl her age to boldly show up claiming paternity for her unborn child, I couldn't underestimate her. According to her pregnancy report, Ms. Sydney was about 9 weeks pregnant. Cyrus was still lying in a hospital bed. He couldn't even speak, let alone defend himself. The caretaker I hired to look after Sydney called and said she was emotionally unstable. She refused to be accompanied, locked herself in her room, and demanded to go to the hospital to see Cyrus. The surveillance footage in the living room showed that the same weak and gentle girl in front of me was now arrogantly scolding the caretaker I had hired, threatening the nutritionist with a hunger strike, and even accusing them of illegal detention. As far as I remembered, I hadn't restricted her movement. I even told her that if she was bored, she could invite friends over. But going to the hospital wouldn't help her, she wasn't going to be able to see anyone. With today's medical technology, it was entirely possible to conduct a paternity test at this stage of pregnancy. However, after examining her, the doctor said the fetal condition was unstable and advised bed rest. She acted like she really cared about the child. Based on her behavior after moving into one of my properties, I began to understand, regardless of who the father was, this child was a win for Sydney. I also wanted to know who the father was. Clay, I said, spread the word. Make sure everyone hears that your President Cyrus has a child on the way. Clay, huh? I had no idea where Cyrus found someone like Clay. He was capable, and I hoped he'd keep working under me. Soon, several shareholders started calling to verify the news. I didn't deny it, so one by one, they advised me to be generous, at least give the mother and child a chance to live in peace. I smiled and agreed. This green hat looked rather good on me. Sydney didn't go to those shareholders who were acting as peacemakers. Instead, she went to Robert and his wife. I couldn't help but suspect it was because their whole family was easy to manipulate. Soon, the whole company knew that Cyrus had cheated on me before the car accident. People started looking at me with sympathetic eyes. I ignored all those looks. Until someone said, "So President Reina, would you say you lost love but gained wealth?" Suddenly, people didn't seem so sympathetic anymore. Back at the hospital, Cyrus's treatment continued, and people kept trying to gather information. One day, the hospital suddenly issued a critical condition notice, and I rushed over at 3 a.m. By 6 a.m., word had spread, and many began calling me to ask about Cyrus's condition. Right then, Sydney, pregnant and all, started demanding to go see her baby's father at the hospital. I had my people block her, so she threatened self-harm to force the caretaker's hands. When the call came through, the woman on the other end sounded flustered. I didn't care how Sydney chose to hurt herself. That baby in her belly? She probably treasured it more than anyone else. That kind of threat wouldn't work on me. But I did say over the phone, let her go. Don't stop her. Then I made another call, make sure she's being followed. I spent the entire day at the hospital. Sydney showed up around evening with red, puffy eyes from crying. She wasn't alone, Robert and his family came too. They stood outside the hospital room, loudly accusing me of being a heartless and venomous woman. Robert and his wife used to live lavishly. Even after the Cyrus family went bankrupt, they'd managed to grab one last bit of wealth and hadn't suffered much. They used to pride themselves on being people of status, but now they were acting like street scoundrels. I had bodyguards by my side, so they couldn't get close. The number of guards at the hospital room had doubled. That only confirmed people's suspicions. Cyrus was really dying, and I wasn't letting anyone near him so I could claim everything for myself. They even called the police to stir up trouble. That day, I stayed in the hospital for a long time. It wasn't until nighttime that I left. I drove myself home. After driving for 10 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The brakes on the car didn't seem to be working. There weren't many cars on the road, but it was dark, and there was a stretch where the streetlights were very dim. I don't even know how I managed to calm myself down. During those moments, I tried several emergency methods for brake failure, but none of them worked. The car wasn't slowing down at all. I took a deep breath and called the police. "Hello, I'm currently driving on National Highway G2XX. My license plate is..." My brakes just failed. The car's hazard lights were flashing, and the passing vehicles mostly made way for me. But there was a busier section of the road up ahead. I had to stop before reaching it. This was my first time facing something like this. The police officer's voice continued in my earphones. It was intense. My adrenaline was surging, and my palms were slick with sweat. The brake pads felt completely dead, not a single response. I could even hear my own breathing. Up ahead was a curve in the road, and some trees. I gritted my teeth and yanked the steering wheel hard. The car spun on the road, and within moments, the rear end slammed into a tree by the roadside. There was a deafening crash, and at the same time, the airbags deployed. The impact was brutal. I didn't even know where I was hurt. My consciousness blurred for a moment. Not long after the collision, sirens sounded around me. I had just left the hospital, and now I was going right back. The good news was that I didn't sustain any serious injuries. But soon, the shocking news came: the accident wasn't just an accident. It was now classified as a criminal case. The brake pads had clear signs of being tampered with. And when I left the hospital earlier, the car was still perfectly fine. The police began checking the hospital surveillance footage. Someone had clearly messed with my car at that critical window of time. Given the situation with Cyrus's inheritance, it was hard not to connect the dots. Of course, the police work faster than I ever could. They soon identified a suspect. Coincidentally, the camera near where I parked was broken. But by comparing footage from surrounding cameras, they still managed to find the perpetrator. The only issue, I didn't recognize the person. The suspect confessed but claimed it was a random crime, that he didn't know me. Random? Targeting me specifically? That's less believable than if I said I was the first emperor of Qin. The police soon discovered that the suspect's relatives had recently made large purchases and received unexplained deposits. Eventually, he admitted to being hired by someone. He was a kidney failure patient, couldn't get a donor, couldn't afford treatment. Someone approached him with a big payout, promising the money in exchange for doing one small job. Before damaging my brakes, he had been staking me out for a few days. However, he didn't know who hired him. So the trail seemed to go cold. At that point, I provided the police with information on a few potential suspects. After surviving the accident, my office moved from the company to the hospital. Cyrus's hospital room wasn't far from mine. Even though I was in the hospital, the waves I caused were far from small. In just a few days, several employees from Cyrus's company resigned. All of them left voluntarily, like they'd gotten wind of something. But those who were truly profiting from the dividends, they weren't willing to let go so easily. I didn't understand how Cyrus had tolerated his company becoming what it was. But I was never one to let things slide. Unlike Cyrus, I didn't have a soft touch. Naturally, the higher-ups weren't pleased with me. God knows how many people's interests I'd disturbed. My accident revealed two things. 1, someone was desperate. 2, someone who stood to gain nothing from Cyrus's inheritance was also desperate. I stayed in the hospital for several more days. Each day, I made time to visit Cyrus. Lying there, he looked like a sleeping beauty. Then the police brought news. Several shareholders from Cyrus's company had been taken in for investigation. One of them had been criminally detained. Very quickly, I got the name, Vance. I remembered this shareholder, partly because he held a significant number of shares and partly because Cyrus had once brought me along to a dinner with him. He was an old acquaintance of the family. When Cyrus was just starting out, Vance had helped him a lot. He currently worked in the company and was one of the few shareholders with real influence. I hadn't expected things to escalate to this point. With Cyrus in a coma, I couldn't get anything useful from him. Clay told me that before the accident, Cyrus had indeed been investigating some old projects within the company. This stir I caused? Too loud to be contained, so I let the news spread. Soon, the company was gripped by fear and anxiety. Stock prices plummeted in a short period of time. An interesting twist, Sydney stopped making a fuss about visiting Cyrus. Instead, she wanted to see me. I let her in. The once gentle, fragile pregnant woman who had first met me now looked very different, makeup perfectly done. President Reina. That's how she addressed me. Last time she called me Big Sister. But this new title sounded just fine to me. I looked at her with mild amusement. What do you want? She froze for a moment, then stiffly replied, I'm here to talk business. What kind of business? Give me 5 million, and I'll abort the baby, she said, gently touching her stomach. I know you don't want this child to split Cyrus's inheritance either. 5 million isn't even worth as much as that ring on your hand, is it? I looked at the pink diamond on the middle finger of my right hand. True, it had cost over 8 million when it was bought. If, as you say, the baby is Cyrus's, then keeping it would clearly be in your best interest. Cyrus and I were never married, so if you insist on a paternity test, I won't stop you. Sydney's expression was a little unnatural, but she still held her ground and said, Of course I know giving birth to this child would be best. But a prenatal paternity test carries risks. How do I know President Cyrus will still be alive by then? If he dies before then and you send him straight to the crematorium, I'll be left with nothing, raising a child alone. A woman who says she'd abort the child for 5 million is now afraid of the risks of a prenatal test? I stayed silent for too long, and she got a little anxious. President Reina, this deal is all gain and no loss for you. I cut her off. I can talk business with you, but not about whether this child stays or goes. First, tell me, who is the child's biological father? Is it Vance? She froze. I made an information trade with Sydney. What she asked for wasn't much in my eyes, but what she gave me wasn't worth that price either. I'm not short on money, but I'm not a charity. Not just anyone can come to me and get a payout. I didn't hear from Sydney for a while after that. But she had provided some useful information. Vance was indeed the father of the child she was carrying. She showed me the evidence she had secretly collected, and she even told me the benefits Vance had promised her. The night Cyrus and Sydney had any contact, Vance had been present too. Some things just can't be hidden unless no one does them. Vance ended up in the police station and never came out. His subordinates had different ideas, some resigned, others tried to climb the ranks. I stayed at the hospital for a week, and just as I was about to be discharged, I got good news. Cyrus had woken up. He came back from the brink of death. This didn't surprise me. The doctors had said after the last resuscitation that his condition was improving. I was the first to be notified when he woke up. I sat by his hospital bed, looking at Cyrus. He was lucky, despite such a serious car accident, he hadn't lost any limbs. We locked eyes for a long time. Finally, Cyrus spoke first. Reina? If you still remember who I am, I guess my brain wasn't damaged. How long was I unconscious? His voice was hoarse. About 2 months, I replied. He seemed like he had a lot to say, but his body was still weak. The doctors advised minimal talking and more rest. A few days later, once his condition stabilized, word spread that Cyrus had regained consciousness. I scaled the number of bodyguards outside his room down to 2. Anyone who wanted to visit him could do so, as long as he agreed. So Cyrus was forced to listen to all kinds of complaints about me. After hearing just the first half, he sighed, "Why did you all go and provoke her?" Then came the second half, which included but was not limited to me coveting his fortune for years, making life difficult for old employees at the company, monopolizing power, and being intolerant of his relatives and supposed child. Cyrus listened calmly at first, until the word child came up. What child? Whose child? The person thought Cyrus had forgotten he had fathered a child while in a coma, so they told him about it. Cyrus exploded. I haven't even touched another woman. Who the hell did I get pregnant? He shouted just as I happened to walk to the door with a meal the housekeeper had prepared for him. He was recovering quickly after waking up, clearly still strong. He roared, "This is absolute nonsense. Who's been spreading these rumors while I was in a coma?" His outburst stunned the people who had been accusing me. President Cyrus, you didn't have a little fling outside, someone asked timidly. A fling? Do you not know my girlfriend, Raina? We've been together for years. We might be getting married next year. Are you trying to ruin me? Cyrus's reaction left the group speechless. So what was that whole performance just now? That's when I walked in. They all jumped in shock. Lying on the hospital bed, Cyrus looked at me with pleading eyes. Raina, they're slandering me. I calmly watched those people as they got up and said they were leaving, my face devoid of expression. These people had always assumed my relationship with Cyrus was just sugar daddy and mistress. After all, we'd been together for years, wasn't it time for a newer, prettier girl to replace me? Raina, Cyrus's voice sounded pitiful. I was wondering why you've been so cold to me these past few days. So it turns out they were all spreading rumors about me. Don't you trust me? I hadn't intended to bring up the topic so soon, but Cyrus's expression left me no choice. I believe you, I began, pausing briefly, but why are there several apps on your phone that are locked with passwords? After Cyrus's accident, his phone screen was badly shattered, but it could still turn on, and we could see some of the contents. Apart from the main screen lock, certain apps also required separate passwords to access. But the passwords weren't anything I recognized or knew about. My question made Cyrus fall silent. He moved his lips as if to say something, but couldn't seem to find the right words. After a long pause, he finally muttered, I would never cheat on you. You have to believe me. Same as always, unreasonable. I took out the nutritional meal I'd prepared. Let's get your body back in shape first. We'll talk about everything else later. After Cyrus woke up, the police had come to take his statement regarding the accident. His account more or less matched the testimony of the other girl injured in the crash. A few days later, the police returned with the final conclusion. Cyrus's car accident was classified as a criminal case, an attempted murder for hire. The mastermind, Vance. And it turned out, my own car crash had also been his doing. We had both narrowly escaped death. The day the result came out, Cyrus sat on his hospital bed in silence for a long time. I sat next to him quietly, not wanting to disturb him. To Cyrus, Vance was once a highly respected elder, someone who had genuinely helped him a lot in the early days of his startup. Because of that trust, Cyrus had handed over many projects to him. It wasn't until shortly before the accident that he discovered Vance had developed a gambling addiction and had repeatedly embezzled company funds. Even then, Cyrus had been willing to give him a chance. As long as Vance returned the money within a specified time frame, he wouldn't press charges. But Cyrus had clearly underestimated the madness of a compulsive gambler. That beloved Uncle Vance not only couldn't fill the financial hole, he had set his sights on Cyrus's assets and even wanted his life. I didn't know what to say to comfort him. Cyrus had fought hard to get to where he was. For everyone who had helped him in his darkest moments, he always gave back in whatever way he could. When I invested a small amount in his startup early on, he gave me 20% of the shares. After dating for a few years, his will listed everything under my name. Cyrus wasn't some naive fool, he saw through everything clearly. Granted, before his family went bankrupt, he had been a bit of a naive fool. He reached out and hugged me, resting his head on my shoulder for a long while. I stayed there with him in silence. Meanwhile, the outside world kept turning rapidly. The news about a company executive hiring a hitman to kill the boss spread quickly. The people that Vance had promoted in the company all kept their heads down, likely never imagining that their almighty Vance could lose his mind like that. Not long after Vance was taken into custody, his wife immediately filed for divorce and left the country with their children. As for Cyrus, his injuries would take months to heal properly. Recovery was going to be long and arduous. Later, his uncle's family came to visit, essentially to complain that I had fired their son. Cyrus already knew. "Uncle, I've heard more than just that," he said. "I heard that barely 2 days after my accident, you and Hayden snuck into my shareholder meeting?" Robert's face turned sour. "Cyrus, I'm your uncle. Isn't it normal that I help manage some things while you're recovering? I'm not a child anymore." "I don't need to be coddled," Cyrus replied coldly. To be fair, Cyrus hadn't treated Robert's family particularly well over the years, but they hadn't exactly earned it either. Back when his parents passed away after the family bankruptcy, Robert ended up living in the villa that Cyrus's parents had bought outright for the grandparents. According to inheritance law, Robert, being the only child, did inherit it. But during Cyrus's early startup days, they hadn't lifted a finger to help. While Cyrus's parents were alive, Robert and his wife had benefited plenty from their generosity. People are supposed to repay kindness with kindness. Cyrus said, "From what I heard, Hayden was fired for skipping work without cause. He got the proper severance. If he's not interested in working here anymore, then he's free to find another company." He had no intention of bringing Hayden back. Robert was getting desperate now, but still didn't seem to realize he was the one asking for a favor. Pointing at me, he snapped, "You're so blinded by that vixen. One day, she'll be the death of you." Security escorted him out. Cyrus remained in the hospital for some time before he was discharged. His executives were all eager for him to return and take the reins again, but I was the one handling things in the meantime. From the outside, it might have looked like I was the one clinging to him for money and power. Cyrus stayed home to recuperate, occasionally joining online meetings. His close friends came to check on him. After confirming he was okay, they each gave him a thumbs up and said he had one hell of a lucky escape. As Cyrus slowly recovered, his energy began to return. He even started to resemble the young man he'd been in his early 20s, when he was often approached by talent scouts on the street. "Babe, just got off work?" Cyrus was wearing a black button-down shirt, half the buttons undone, revealing his sharp collarbones. He was also wearing a necklace. I don't know why he dresses so seductively at home. My gaze lingered on him for a moment before looking away. "Have you eaten?" "No, I was waiting for you." "Then let's eat." Cyrus asked me, "When I used to work overtime or attend social events, did you feel bored at home?" I looked at him oddly. Why would I be bored? I could play mahjong with friends, go shopping, or have fun. "Oh." Cyrus's voice held a strange note of disappointment. Before the car accident, he was just like this, mature and composed outside like a young entrepreneur, but at home, he was like a childish puppy. After dinner, I showered and went to the study. I had some documents to review. Cyrus came in, stood beside me for a while, then reached out to massage my shoulders. I looked up at him. "What is it?" "Nothing, I just want to be with you for a bit." "Okay." So he stayed. I focused on the screen, working, and vaguely sensed someone sitting on the carpet beside me. Then, the hand I had resting idly on my leg was taken and played with. Eventually, I noticed something unusual. The back of my hand felt slightly damp. I looked down and pinched Cyrus's cheek, saying softly, "Be good. I'll be done soon." He stayed quiet for a long time until I finally shut the laptop and stood up. Cyrus stood as well. His eyes now held a clear, suggestive look. I knew it, he hadn't dressed like that tonight without a reason. Now, he leaned in stickily, staring at my lips without saying a word. His gaze was full of impure intentions. I was about to scold him when the next second, he kissed me. Enough, I said after a while, pulling back. My lips tingled slightly. Cyrus acted like he hadn't heard me. Reina, he said in a low voice, how would you know I'm not broken unless you try me? I glanced downward. You're not broken, but if you try anything funny tonight, you might end up that way. I coldly and ruthlessly rejected him. Vance's crimes had basically been established. The criminal case took several months. Hiring someone to commit murder was a confirmed fact, and he also had economic crimes. He probably wouldn't be getting out for the rest of his life. When Cyrus heard the result, he didn't react much. He had accepted it. After 6 months of recovery, his company was practically mine. No one treated me like Cyrus's kept woman anymore. And just then, I resigned. Cyrus got his office back, and the whole company was in an uproar. It looked like I had handed over my hard-won trophy to him, and he came out the winner. From the employees' perspective, I was just a love-struck fool. But that didn't last long. One day, news about Reina started surfacing. No one knows who leaked it. Cyrus came back and made a joke of it. My employees now look at me like I'm a pretty boy who landed a sugar mama. I own a few overseas companies and have family businesses. Although I haven't taken over them yet, I'm the only legal heir. It's kind of fair. I used to be Cyrus's caged canary. Now, he's my pretty boy. Once Cyrus had mostly recovered, he started working out again. The doctor said moderate exercise was fine. He trained for a month and excitedly invited me to inspect the results. Not bad. On my 28th birthday, Cyrus had been acting secretive for days. He thought I hadn't noticed. We planned to spend the day at the beach. Just like previous years, I wore a beautiful dress, did my makeup, and held Cyrus's hand as we walked by the sea. The shimmering deep blue dress suited the ocean perfectly. Suddenly, fireworks exploded in the sky. Lights lit up, revealing the fully decorated beach before my eyes. The night turned magical. Under the lights, the seaside looked stunning. Cyrus knelt before me on one knee and pulled out a ring, a blue diamond. Reina, will you marry me? I remembered his recent secretive behavior. So this was what he was planning. Did you ever think I might say no? I asked. He hadn't exactly tested the waters about proposing. We were so familiar with each other that if he even hinted, I'd know what he was up to. I did. Cyrus looked at me intently. Then this ring is just your birthday present. Just don't break up with me. His nervous expression was actually kind of cute. I reached out my hand, and he almost put the ring on the wrong finger in his rush. After putting it on, he stared at my hand for a while, then leaned down to kiss the back of it. Reina, thank you for staying by my side all these years. He wasn't entirely right, it wasn't just me. We stayed by each other's side. Later, I found out that the young woman in the car during Cyrus's accident was a jewelry designer. The 18-karat blue diamond ring on my hand was her design. At the time, it was just a sketch. After recovering from her injuries, she completed it. Since Cyrus had intended to surprise me from the beginning, that designer never told me her identity from the crash. Cyrus even set a password on his phone to keep his plan secret. The proposal should have happened earlier, but because of the accident, Cyrus nearly lost his life. After I said yes, he threw himself into preparing to meet my parents. Babe, what kind of jewelry does your mom like? Gold? Diamonds? Jade? Does your mom still like watching comedy shows? I'll learn a skit and perform it for her. I got your dad's favorite liquor ready. I won't let him drink me under the table this time. My parents love overseas. I brought Cyrus with me. He brought all sorts of gifts and plans to win over the in-laws. Thanks to his sweet mouth, Cyrus fit right in with my family. Even after marriage, this continued. He called them mom and dad so smoothly, his standing nearly surpassed that of our family dog. That guy really is sly. Extra Cyrus and I met in junior high. My parents had a project in China, so we moved there for a few years. We became neighbors. He was a little prince back then. Proud, but cute. I was a few months older than him. When our parents introduced us, his folks jokingly told him to call me Big Sister. He was shorter than me at the time. He called me Big Sister so reluctantly. Didn't stop him from calling me that in bed later. We were classmates for several years, went to and from school together. Our classmates thought we were dating. Even our teachers thought so, one even called our parents in once. After the misunderstanding was cleared, I ended up collecting a love letter on Cyrus's behalf. He got mad. The next day, he returned the letter himself and gave me the cold shoulder for a whole week. I bought him a box of chocolates to make peace. It worked. Easy to coax. Later, my parents' business took them abroad, so I went with them, but Cyrus and I kept in touch. He even flew out once to visit me. One week, he stopped messaging. I found out his parents had been in an accident. I flew back to China to be with him for a few days. By then, he was much taller than me. He cried until his eyes and nose were red. So sad and helpless, saying he had no parents anymore. I cried with him. The most impulsive thing I ever did was probably giving him most of my savings when he had nothing, so he could start a business. Cyrus struggled for a few years. Every time he called, he only told me good news. After he made it, he gave me a lot of money. Only then did he dare confess that he liked me. He flew to my city just to do it. Unluckily, my parents were visiting me that day too. He confessed downstairs while my parents watched from the balcony upstairs. Afterward, my dad commented, "I knew this kid was up to something." Even from across the world, he wouldn't give up chasing my daughter. Really wants to join our family, huh? My mom, I thought you guys had been dating for years already. He's just confessing now.